Canadian self-appointed leader of the Slammers and the official voice for all who follow Tole, paused for a moment to enjoy the sudden hush among the crowd of fanatic followers, and then moved closer to the great ball of string, which served dual functions, both as an odd metaphor and an even odder microphone, and uttered the now infamously convoluted instruction to all true believers, blah, 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 an instruction to the faithful, which has been translated successfully in recent times only by the exhaustive scholarly work of thousands and thousands of linguists and grammarians, nearly half of whom generally agree that the core message issued that day by the Grand Ayatollah actually was a secret missive to all the slammers in the crowd, exhorting them to grab your balls and hit the weight, cause it's 2 for Tuesday and every third game is free. A curious reference to the small but growing intergalactic pastime of the Slammers, which, to be specific, refers to the Slammers' complete and total fascination with that particularly noble game and sport which on the planet Earth is called bowling, and is well known to evoke comparable, if not greatly increased, levels of enthusiasm among its more impassioned devotees on Earth who, quite naturally, form bowling leagues where intricately designed shirts that often feature custom embroidery showcasing their club names and favorite monikers, don multicolored shoes which are made from the dried and processed hides of assorted animals and are designed by specially trained physicists and engineers to provide equal amounts of sliding and stopping power, and who, more than anything else, desire to get as many strikes as possible, especially in the 10th frame. The recent strikes of another type made by the Slammers in their assault on the planet Ranivir have been more successful than the Grand Ayatollah had dreamed possible. And while the victory was something for all Slammers to relish, the simple fact of the matter was that none of the Slammers was able to relish much of anything, since one only became a Slammer by succumbing completely to the elaborate and ever-present brainwashing that transformed otherwise good and sensible people into Slammers, something the Grand Ayatollah knew far too well, since he was the one who devised the various brainwashing procedures and techniques that made it possible to control and to manipulate his fanatic followers, the Slammers. In the days and hours before the assault on Ranivir began, the Grand Ayatollah had devoted most of his waking time to observing and refining the preparations being made for the assault. And even though the assault on Ranivir had all the appearances of being routine, the Grand Ayatollah was very adamant in his concern that nothing should go wrong. In part, of course, this was a consequence of the greatly increased paranoia which affected the Grand Ayatollah as more nations, planets, solar systems, and galaxies became aware of the Slammer menace. But at the deepest levels, the Grand Ayatollah was so completely insecure and insane in every respect that no matter how big the great ball of string became, it would never be big enough to fill the vast emptiness in his psyche. The void which at first unwillingly, but later with consciously inviting willingness, soon became filled with hate for everything good, a hate so deeply overwhelming that it consumed the mind of the Grand Ayatollah and warped it so completely that the Grand Ayatollah became different, transformed both internally and externally in ways that range from the subtle, such as his need to do everything 3 times, no more, no less, to the obvious, such as the curved horn that started growing from the middle of his forehead, and the fuzzy tail that soon appeared and caused him to begin wearing elaborate robes in an effort to hide it, since it tended to make him look a bit like a monkey. The assault plan was as simple as it was brilliant, and it followed a time-tested schedule. First, thousands and thousands of Slammers dressed in clown costumes and flying tiny airplanes which resembled bumper cars flew in formations across the sky, releasing colorful smoke trails that curiously stayed in place and were not affected by the prevailing winds in the atmosphere. These colorful smoke trails actually were special vapor pipes, which soon were woven into a grid that interlaced throughout the sky to form a net which covered the city or region that was being attacked. And since the Slammers usually began their assaults in more rural areas, where people typically had no knowledge or advance warning of the Slammers, what usually happened was that people would stand outside and watch the sky, presuming, quite unfortunately and incorrectly, that it was a holiday show of some sort, even though this was no holiday show, and its purpose was dangerously simple. Once the net was in place, it became energized. It began radiating special brainwashing waves, which quickly took control of the minds of all those people who did not have sufficient foresight or sense to recognize what was happening and, consequently, failed immediately to cover their heads with aluminum foil, since the only effective way to block these special brainwashing waves was to use aluminum foil as a protective shield. Within a matter of minutes, these unfortunate local inhabitants were transformed into a new army of slammers. Then were given instructions regarding their roles in the assault and soon began heading in groups toward the more populated areas of the planet where the final assaults occurred. So long as everything went precisely according to schedule, an entire planet could be conquered in less than a standard galactic week, which, according to generally accepted rules, was 8 days, something that greatly annoyed the Grand Eye of Tole, since it was not evenly divisible by 3. This being, among other things, one of the primary motivations that drove the Grand Eye of Tole to need to control as many nations, planets, solar systems, and galaxies as possible, which, of course, was the only way he could gain sufficient popular votes to cause precisely 1 day to be added to the generally accepted standard galactic week, thereby making it 9 days, which, of course, was evenly divisible by 3. Over the course of history, there have been many wars fought for a variety of good, bad, and remarkably silly reasons. But since this particular war was being fought over the definition of the generally accepted standard galactic week, then the final analysis placed it in a position somewhere between bad and silly overall, especially considering that very few of the inhabited planets in the universe even knew about the generally accepted standard galactic week, let alone gave it any thought or credibility in practice. On some planets, there were only days but no week, while on other planets there were neither days nor weeks but plenty of very long hours. And more than a few well-advanced planets literally had no time for time at all, since having decided by mutual agreement among their various inhabitants that the concepts of past, present, and future were such a waste of time that it was better to avoid them entirely, a very sensible strategy which had the additional benefit of greatly simplifying the conjugation of verbs.